Hi, I'm Rachel from So Happy Patchwork and Quilting Classes. In this class we're going to learn how to make a simple patchwork bag. Hopefully you've printed out the PDF and we're ready to go. Okay, so first of all we want to trim this fat quarter square so that we've got a reference line to measure our strips from. So I'm going to line up one of these horizontal lines with the very edge of the fabric, and I'm going to line up the ruler as close as I can, so I'm going to get a nice square cut. I'm going to start cutting before the fabric, one single movement away from myself, hold my ruler down, pull away the excess, and there's my nice straight edge. So now I'm going to flip that over and I'll need to cut 2-inch strips. So I'm going to lay my ruler over the fabric that I want. I'm going to line up the 2-inch line with the edge of the fabric, and I'm going to line up one of the horizontal lines again with the fold on my fabric to make sure that the cut is square. So I'm going to slice down the fabric, pull the excess away, and there's my first 2-inch strip. Now we need to cut 6 of these from each of your fabrics. So once you've cut your strips, we're going to stitch them into pairs. You're going to take your light strip and your dark strip, you're going to put them right sides together, and you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down the one edge, the long edge, so that when you open it out you've now got a piece of fabric that's 2 strips. Now we want to press the seam allowances. There are 2 schools of thought in patchwork. One leaves the seam allowances open and one presses towards generally the darker side. I'm of the school where we press towards the darker side. I'll explain why later. So to press our seams, what we're going to do is you're going to lay your strip out, you're going to iron it. By the way, don't ever iron on your cutting boards. You will melt it, it will warp. Ask me how I know this. Iron on an ironing board, press the seam flat, then open up your fabrics. Now it's much easier to open it with the side where you want the seam allowance on top, fold it back and then just press along that seam. Then you'll get a nice strip with a nice flat seam allowance. Do that to all your strips, and then we're going to start chopping them up into squares. So to chop them up into squares, I'm going to use again one of my rotary cutting rulers. You may notice this attractive piece of masking tape that I've put just beyond the 3.5 inch line. Just let me show you. The 3.5 inch line is this white line down here. When you're doing loads of cutting, it's much easier to have that bit of tape on to ensure that you always cut along the same line. Excuse me. It's so easy just to go 1/4 inch either side, but if you've got that bit of masking tape, you can put your ruler down, line up your fabric with a stitch line on your fabric with one of your horizontal lines on your ruler, line up your 3.5 inch line and cut. So next time you're just going to lay your ruler down again, and because you've got that bit of reference line, you don't have to hunt around for the 3.5 inch line. Line up that line, cut again. Now I need to cut out 32 of these little squares because it's going to be 16 for each block. Right, next we're going to arrange our squares how the block is going to look. So you're going to arrange them in rows. Now it just so happens with this pattern, each time you put down a horizontal block you want the grey at the bottom, and when you put down a vertical block you want the grey to be on the right. So you're going to have 4 rows of 4, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 2 that are next to each other, flip them right sides together and stitch down that seam so that it looks like this. So once you've got the first 2 stitched together, you're going to stitch the next 2, then stitch them all into pairs, and then you're going to stitch these pairs into rows. So I'm going to put two pairs together, stitch down that middle seam, and then when I open it out it'll look like this. Now this time, when I'm pressing, instead of always pressing to the dark side, to keep the work flat, can you see how I've pressed that seam allowance towards the piece that hasn't got a seam? If I was to press it that side, it wouldn't lie so flat, there'd be a little bump in the middle. So press them all out towards the vertical ones. So now comes the bit where we're going to stitch these rows together.